that came out. How many of you have already seen the exhibition? And for all of those hands that have not gone up, please, please, please come on out and see this exhibition because it's beautiful, it is impactful. I mean, any word, superlative that we can think of, it is that. And we are so proud and pleased to be able to present this, as proud and pleased as we are to present Chantrell and Fahamu this afternoon. You're in for a very, very, a conversation is going to just be dope. You're going to be glad, you're here. So before we begin, let me go ahead and just take care of the housekeeping and thank people that really help the Hammons House Museum do what we do. And without them, we would not be able to continue to keep this moving. First, I have to say thank you to Auburn Avenue Research Library. Thank God for partners that have more space than we do. Because we wouldn't have been able to fit you all at the Hammons House. And so we have a long-running partnership with Auburn Avenue Research Library. So I want to thank Morris and his team for always opening doors for us, and then the joint programming that we do as well. So if you can give them a round of applause and let them hear it, we appreciate that. Also, I'd like to thank people who wrote checks, you know, and that's a big deal, to write checks to fund us and to enable us to continue this really, really important work. So let me start with the Fulton County Board of Commissioners and the Fulton County Department of Arts and Culture, the City of Atlanta Office of Cultural Affairs, and then we had individuals for this particular exhibition where I just picked up the phone and called people and said, hey, we need a little bit more money. You know, can you help us out? And they came through, and we really appreciate that, and they came through in a big way. So Sonia Halpern, Erwin and Veronica Carter, and Christopher Swain, and then of course our Hammons House Museum members and donors. Funds that you give us as a member and as part of your membership, that money goes towards these types of activities. They go towards our capacity building at the organization. They go towards, you know, how we pay staff and what have you. So if you are not a member, I know that we have a lot of members in the room and we thank you for your membership, but if you're not a member, become a member of the Hammons House. Consider that. We have a sustainable membership where you can give us $5 a month, $10 a month, $15, or even $25 a month. And that helps us with cash flow, and it sustains this institution. And so y'all drink more than that in Starbucks or the slutty vegan. Them burgers are $15. You know, so please, please consider becoming a member of the Hammons House Museum and understand that your dollars are going to really help to support like this great institution. We turned 30 years old last year. Thank you. And I'm gonna let you know that 30 years for an African-American arts institution is no small feat. Those organizations are disappearing across the country. And when they disappear from sight, people forget that they were even, it's like, what used to be on this corner? I don't even remember. And so they disappear from mind also, but the other thing that disappears with it is how we teach and how we implement our culture. And those things disappear as well. And so without these institutions, there is none of that. And so I really want you to meditate on that and think about that as we talk about the celebration of Black men through this exhibition, as well as the exhibition that Fahamu has up right now over at Emory University. And finally, well not finally, I also want to thank the National Performance Network and the Visual Arts Network out of New Orleans. They are also funders of this exhibition. And I want to recognize my board members, and if there are board members, just raise your hand in the room. So we have a few board members here, and then members, raise your hand in the room if you're a member. Look at y'all, thank you so much. But there's a whole lot that didn't raise their hands, so remember, we have membership forms outside. And also just friends and supporters of this organization because, oh, and let me also recognize Ed Spriggs, who is in the house. Ed, raise your hand, please. For those of you who do not know Ed Spriggs is the founder of the Hammons House Museum. He's the man that had vision and said Atlanta needs an African-American museum that's not necessarily connected to one of the universities, that's a standalone. And he said that, and he made it happen with a group of people. So, Ed, we are forever in your debt. So thank you. So this is the part of the program where I introduce our two speakers. However, y'all know who they are. You know Fahamu, and you definitely know Chantrell. And if you didn't know her before you came, you know her now. If y'all checked out the video that we posted and all the times that we've had a great time working on this project with her. A few years ago, I saw Dandelion back in 2015, I saw that it was opening up in Chicago. And I have been enamored with this whole idea of the dandelion ever since I saw a documentary probably about 12 years ago that with the Pan-African Film Festival, and it was about the dandies of the Congo. And I was enamored. I was mesmerized, like, look at these brothers in these suits. And, you know, when they live in these other spaces, they're not living in high-rise apartments and what have you, but you know what? So clean, so clean. Actually, he's one of them. So clean. And so so when the exhibition came up, I was like, oh, I gotta see it. And at that time, I wasn't even with the Hammons House Museum. I wasn't even thinking about, you know, being the director of a museum. But then as soon as I became a director of a museum, I was like, Fahamu, I know Chantrell's your girl. You got her phone number? And so he connected us, and the rest is history. So that was probably about a year and a half ago, and then here we are. So without further ado, I want to bring to the stage Chantrell P. Lewis, curator of Dandelion, and Dr. Fahamu Peku.
What's up, ATL?
And what's up, New Orleans? See New Orleans in the house. I know might start a riot, but you know.
No.
It's all love. 'Cause I was like,
love.
aren't we supposed to be boycotting the NFL anyway?
I completely am. I completely am.
Yeah.
But you know, we want to thank everybody for coming out. This is really great, you know, to have our worlds collide the way that they have this weekend, and to be able to sit here before you guys and have a conversation, you know, both as children of Shango. I thought it would
Kawo, Kabiosile.
Hey, I thought it would be appropriate if we crack this whiskey.
See, Fahamu's behind. This is peer pressure, y'all. He came up in here, and I was like, first of all, he was like, I ain't getting no Prosecco, but I got some strawberry whiskey. Strawberry, mind you.
I tried to help her out. It's flavored.
I drink rum. Okay, I'm a rum drinker, first of all. Did Grandpa drink whiskey? I don't know, my uncle Nathan back here.
He said yes.
Yes.
He said yes. Go ahead.
So for my ancestors.
Yes, crack that. I told her I was going to make her drink that.
In front of people, because I ain't going to be no punk now. Is this illegal?
There you go. Y'all give us some love. Show us some love.
We're going to really have a conversation now.
Yes, it's about to get real. But, you know, I guess you guys can kind of see that this is not the first time that Chantrell and I have met or sat around drinking together. And I thought we would start our conversation by just kind of talking about, you know, how we came to be in each other's universes, you know. Now, you know, for me, it was in 2010 when you curated the exhibition on Fela Kuti. And there was a call for artists to submit work along the theme of Fela Kuti's life. And many artists, I believe, you know, were creating pieces that were portraits of Fela. But I saw it as an opportunity to engage with another aspect of Fela's world that a lot of people don't necessarily think about or didn't think about in a particular way. And so I did a portrait of the wives of Fela Kuti, his Ialaje, the women who built him up, supported him, and were his, you know, his army essentially. You know, they fought alongside him for freedom and equality and that voice that we are so familiar with today. And Chantrell was the curator of that exhibition. She saw my proposal, and she said, yeah. And I packed that painting up on the back of a pickup truck and drove it to New York. Yeah. And that's how we met.
Yeah, we did. And I remember when I first, you know, virtually met Fahamu. You know, he was going by the moniker we all know, Fahamu Peku is the shit.
Hey.
And it's like, you gotta have a lot of self-esteem and be real self-confident to just be like creating a whole hashtag for Fahamu Peku is the shit. And now that you're a child of Shango, I mean, there's no wonder. And for those of you all who don't know, Shango is the god of thunder and lightning in Yoruba cosmology. He's a hyper-masculine individual. He was a king of the Oyo Empire. And he had 3 wives, but that's not relevant to this story. But there's there's a lot of Shango, there's a lot of energy on this stage. I'll say that. But that's when we met and we just clicked. We're fam. I think in this industry that we're in, the art industry can be very pretentious. For those of you all who are in the industry and may not be, academia can also be sometimes pretentious and inaccessible. And I think the common thread that Fahama and I have in common is like our genuine connectivity to like our people and to our community. You know what I mean? And so it's expressed in our work. It's expressed in how we go about presenting our work, and whose stories we're telling and how we're telling them, how we contextualize our work. And so I think that's one of the ways that like we've always been connected, because we keep it real. It's not performative. Right. That's not performative.
And I would say too, I think one of the things that has really compelled us to one another, and we've commiserated with one another over this as well, is we've kind of navigated the Black fine art world. Yes. Along a path that we forged ourselves. You know, it wasn't if you kind of observe some of the art world, there are certain benchmarks that people in that industry have, and we don't have those benchmarks necessarily. But we've been doing the work, and we continue to do the work, and I think that has allowed us to have a kind of freedom in our voice and expression that a lot of other people may not necessarily have.
All right. So you were asking me about the project itself, right? Or just myself? What were you asking me? See, it's that strawberry whiskey. I'm a lightweight. I never said I was a heavyweight, y'all. You were asking me about the project itself, or just work in general?
Well, yeah, like work in general, and specifically, I know that you've done a number of projects, and for those of you who are not aware, a lot of Chantrell's work has been international in its scope and in its reach. Dandelion is one of many curatorial projects that you've done. But I think that central to a lot of your ideas is this notion of Black masculinity and representation in its various forms, and the ways in which Black identity and Black male identity are imaged, performed, and then articulated, in various spaces. And so maybe just talk a little bit about some of those other projects and how that might have led you to Dandelion.
So I'll begin by telling you how I came to be, and that's as a child and a daughter of New Orleans, Louisiana. My family comes from the lower Ninth Ward. My paternal side of the family, my maternal side of the family comes from Algiers, which Algiers, people always claim Treme as the oldest Black neighborhood, African-American neighborhood in the U.S., but really I locate Algiers as that because when enslaved Africans were first brought to Louisiana and to the U.S. South through that particular port, they were first brought to Algiers, which is on the west bank of New Orleans, right? So it's the French quarters is on the east bank, and majority of the rest of the city on the west bank is Algiers. And they said that it was named Algiers because there was a traveler who came and he said if you stood on the east bank and looked over, Algiers looked like the opposite coast of France, right? Like Algeria, so it looked like Africa, little Africa. So it was at Algiers where these women were disembarking. They were taking okra seeds out of their hair because that's how one of the ways okra was transplanted to the New World, because they didn't know where they were going when they were, boarding those ships, but they were brilliant enough to understand that we're going to have to eat something. And so that's how okra got brought to at least Louisiana, to that landscape. So it's through, I grew up on both sides of the river between Algiers, New Orleans East, the lower 9th Ward and the 7th Ward, and I went to school uptown at Xavier Prep. And my family was both a family of matriarchs and as well as patriarchs, right? I never had this concept of like, Black men being like dangerous or irrelevant or absent, because I had so many Black men in my life. My father was one of 8 boys. So my grandmother had 12 kids. one of which is here, my father's oldest brother. And so I remember my grandfather was a painter in the Lower Ninth Ward. He painted portraits of people using pastel as a medium. And I was just highly influenced by the men in my family. I looked up to them. They told me stories. Sometimes it would be lies, you know what I mean? Like in my family, they always talk about swapping lies. Like my dad's like, yeah, I was on the phone with your Uncle Nathan. He started swapping lies, so I told him an even bigger lie. So then he had to tell me an even bigger lie, right? So that's what, like it was almost like dozens, right? How they were always signifying in my family. And so like growing up in New Orleans, like art is everywhere. The aesthetics is everywhere. The Mardi Gras Indians, music. I remember, you could just be rolling down the street and you'll see a little boy playing a French horn in a projects. So art was very accessible in New Orleans, and it was something that was like lived every day. Because, in our traditions, in African traditions, art wasn't something to put on a wall somewhere and to be preserved like a mask, but it was a living, breathing thing. So when mask was created, and we talk about that when we talk about your work, it was something that was like ritualized. It wasn't a very static thing. It was constantly moving. And so that is what really shaped me, I think, in my worldview. And so in terms of the masculinity piece, like my projects have always been, I look at myself as a storyteller. I mean, I'm a curator by trade, but I've just started to realize that what I've really been trying to do is tell stories about our people, because there are so many narratives that we've been told that we don't even really know who we are half the time, or we continue to like repeat the same narratives over and over again. But there are like millions of stories that have yet to be excavated. And so I've attempted in my work to not talk about just the art itself and the form, because I feel like that's a very Eurocentric process, but really talk about the story, the context behind the work. So whether it's a exhibition about Fela, or an exhibit about sex crimes against Black girls, or the sacred feminine energy and deities, or the contemporary Black South, right, Zwarte Piet in the Netherlands. It's always been about the idea of telling these stories. And then I think the masculinity piece, again, it was just like the idea that masculinity is not a monolith. There's a predominant narrative in media and society about who Black men are globally. And that was something that I was trying to, I guess, engage with and combat through, this project in particular.
And so with Dandelion, did that come about as a result of some of your travels specifically? Because I think one of the things that if you've seen the show, you see that the representations of these Black dandies that you've curated into the show they're not location specific, and that it is a international conversation, is a transcontinental conversation. So I'm curious as to how your curatorial vision, came to shape, that perspective of the project.
Yeah, it was definitely highly influenced by my travels, but I would be remiss to not acknowledge, if I didn't acknowledge the fact that I first came into contact with the African diaspora at an institution called Howard University.
Hey,
HU in the house, HU. So, I'm coming from New Orleans. It's 1996. I was still going by Gangsta Brown or Fire Trail or the Super Mac, one of those many monikers. We
or like for Humble Pickles and shit.
Exactly. Yeah. I was, in middle school calling myself Gangsta Brown. So I was a rapper, y'all. Don't.
Hey, wait. I'm gonna tell y'all right now. Please don't get mad at me. But if you go on YouTube, you could get a dose. You could get that smoke.
Why they be putting us on stage together, I don't even know. I went to Howard. Okay, I was a studious, straight A student who had gone to Catholic schools from K through 12, graduated from Xavier University Preparatory High School of New Orleans, and I was a budding scholar at Howard University. And I was coming from New Orleans, so it's 96, I still had a perm, I was still Catholic and Christian. And I got on Howard's campus, and it was just like blown away by the diversity and the nuance of the Black experience in one space. Like I remember, my great-grandfather on my dad's side came to the States from Jamaica. He went to Tuskegee Institute. and then came down to Louisiana, and he taught at Southern University in Baton Rouge, where also my dad and my other uncle went. And so, you know, I always claimed to be Jamaican. Like, my dad was always, like, my grandfather was like, yeah, girl, you got one of them Jamindian noses, because he said, you know, my great-grandfather was Jamaican, great-grandmother was Native American, so I had a Jamindian nose. So I'm like, I'm Jamaican, representing, you know, Jamaica, all that, right? I get to Howard. I mean, real Jamaicans. First of all, I was like, dance hall, I didn't even know what that was. I'm trying to second line off a dance hall, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, oh, that's not gonna work. Then I found out they ate goat, okay? I was like, yeah, I'm from New Orleans. I'm just regular old black American, right? I stopped claiming that real quick. But that's when I really understood the nuances. Like, I had this homeboy named Bienvenido Vicente Lebron, right? He had this big flag up in his room in Drew Hall. And so one time he was on the phone with his dad. Now, Benny's darker than me, hair like really curly, and he's speaking fluent Spanish. And I'm like, yo, Benny ass don't be paying attention in Spanish class, so I know his grades ain't better than mine. I told y'all I was studious. And so he was like, I'm Dominican. I was like, okay, like, what does that mean? He's like, I'm Dominican. I'm like, that means having no concept of that. So I called my daddy. I was like, yeah, my homeboy Benny said he's Dominican. Oh, so this is spring break now. I went to go visit him. He was like, yeah, that's some old mango-eating Negroes. He was like, tell the truth. They probably got a crate of mangoes on the kitchen table, huh? And I was like, Daddy, you so ignorant. I'm looking around. Ooh, mangoes on the kitchen table. So, you know, that was like my first introduction, and not only to the larger, greater diaspora, but just the diaspora within the United States. Like, I mean, I had friends from New York, friends from LA, friends from Chicago. We all had different accents. We listened to different music. And I remember even coming to the Atlanta for the first time with my best friend, Nakia, who grew up in Decatur. Decatur in the house? Okay, a couple folks. Decatur, where is greater? And so I went to her house. Now, again, this is the 90s. You know, in Atlanta, y'all was living real good in the 90s. So come to her middle-class house, you know, which looked like a mansion to me, and there was this gold room, because her mom was really into interior decorating. So I was like, Mrs. Scott, did Martin Luther King Jr. happen to die in this room and y'all memorialized it? Like, because it was just so elaborate. I'm just like, wow, black people living like this in a middle class. So I really was like introduced to the diaspora and the diversity even within Afro-America, because that is also a part of the diaspora. Sometimes people would try to deny us of our own culture. Like, I know I'm going on a tangent, but I'm gonna bring it back. But like, for instance, my wedding, my husband is Nigerian, and people assumed that our wedding was just gonna be just complete like Nigerian celebration. I'm like, why do I need to go outside of New Orleans with all of its rich history and culture to find myself when Africa exists in modernity there, right? And so a lot of times I think people would deny Afro-America of our culture, but knowing and understanding that we have actually influenced the rest of the greater diaspora with everything from jazz and the blues and gospel and rock and roll. So even
hip-hop.
Yeah, and hip-hop, absolutely. So all of that's coming outside of this like conversion of blackness within the U.S., right? And so I definitely say, you know, this project was influenced by my travels, but it first began there.
Yeah, y'all can clap for that. So when we think about dandyism, you know, I read this book as a part of my studies at Emory, and I'm drawing a blank on the title, but one of the concepts of this book was fashion as a form of resistance. It wasn't slaves to fashion, but I can't think of the name of it. It's on the tip of my tongue.
But you started talking about oppositional fashion,
Oppositional fashion, exactly. And how dandyism actually emerged as a form of oppositional fashion in the 1800s. So I'm really interested in that concept, even thinking about contemporary fashions, the way that black people style themselves, but specifically black dandyism as a form of resistance. And I wanted to ask you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so when you think about like the slave trade and the act of enslavement, one of the first things they did was like strip us of our like identity, and I mean like clothing was the first thing to go. Like I mean they marched us to like Elmina and Goree Island, naked, right? And contrary to popular belief, we weren't running around on a continent naked. We always adorned ourselves with clothing and then fabric and jewels and bells and all kinds of cloth. And so they took our clothes from us. That was the first thing that they did. And so within enslavement, the first act of resistance was actually owning something, having a little bit of property that was our own. And a lot of times that was the thing that was the most accessible. Like if you think about, remember in 12 Years a Slave, Lupita's character had like that yellow ribbon, and that was so enduring and special to her. And so even after enslavement, the house folks, they really took pride in the idea that I could dress up like master, but I think it was just an idea of also making themselves individual, right? And so like distinguishing themselves as opposed to being this like nameless person that's like this chattel slavery. Clothing then became a part of like identity, so I can now distinguish myself from you. And then one of the first things that people did after they gained freedom was like get dressed up or try to get a suit. So, and there's multiple different examples of that in popular culture. Think about Django. The first thing that Negro did,
a blue suede,
got that blue suede suit, was riding on that horse. Samuel L. Jackson's character was like, who's that on that nag, right? Because it's like audacious. It's a very audacious thing. But I will even place black dandyism before that, because there were chiefs and kings and rulers in West Africa who, when they came in contact with the Europeans who were coming over, they were trading like trinkets and items. So you will see like these chiefs with like bowler hats on, right? And so I actually locate them as the actual first black dandies. But I think that clothing became an act of resistance, just number one, for people to even like just give themselves like an individual identity. So even beyond like I need to be human, I need to dress like I need to get closer to whiteness, it's this concept like I am an individual, and like how can I distinguish myself from everyone else around me, which is definitely a very African concept. That's seen in African dance. That's why, unlike ballet where everybody is like straight up and down and everyone is looking exactly the same, you have improvisation in African dance. You have improvisation in jazz. So that is all an aspect, I think, of the African aesthetic.
So this idea of improvisation, right, is and wait, let me take a swig real quick because we're about to get into it.
Stop bucking him up.
So Chantrell and I have had a long-going debate about some of my ideas as it relates to contemporary fashions and this notion of fashion as resistance, particularly around sagging. Everybody knows what sagging is, yes? And I've, created a body of work, and I have, for a few years, been exploring, the phenomenon of sagging as a form of resistance within black male youth culture specifically, and really considering that sagging is this really sort of defiant oppositional resistance to the system that says you should look this way, pull your clothes up, in a way that this kind of policing of black bodies in this way is a way of erasure for young black men, in that in sagging their pants, they're literally throwing up their middle finger at society like, you can't tell me what to do, I'm going to be me, right? Chantrell doesn't agree. But
at all.
But I think what we're saying is essentially the same thing. Now, I'm not advocating for sagging, and I'm not even.
Because he don't even let his pants sag unless when he painting himself.
Actually, I do.
Oh, okay.
But not.
But your
not
drawers
to that
showing
degree.
and stuff like
Not
that.
To that
Okay.
degree. Yeah, I mean, I'm a father.
Yeah,
Come on now.
grown man. Exactly.
Right. But my point is this. And especially for young men who are still trying to find their voice, right? There's an attraction to that because it is so anti, right? It's punk. And I think, on one level, being able to engage our youth around ideas of resistance, fashion as resistance, and oppositional fashion, and being able to actually have a conversation with them about why they're sagging, as opposed to casting aspersions on them and saying like, oh, you sagging your pants and you're a foul and this, that, and the third. You know what I'm saying? Like we shut off, opportunities to engage and to grow them as well as ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, see, that's the point I agree with. Like, I really think that youth culture is important. I mean, youth culture has always, particularly within, our context within the black community, has always been at the forefront of pushing, like, particularly popular American culture, right? And it's, sagging is not the first time that black youth have expressed themselves. Like, we could go all the way back to, like, zoot suits.
Right.
Which also was a very, it was extremely oppositional because it was actually against the law for men to use so much fabric during World War, I believe it was one, to use so much fabric in their suits. So when they were dressing like that in those zoot suits, like Malcolm X and them, they were like really breaking the law. So were Chicano youth gangs. They also were like breaking the law. And there was like zoot suit riots out in LA, in Cali, and different parts of the country. But so that was oppositional. I think my biggest issue with the sagging phenomena is, and you talked about this in Gravity, in a piece you wrote, this idea of the link between the prison industrial complex. So whether it's like a myth or not that this came from, the idea like men don't have belts in prison and their pants are sagging, I believe that the prison industrial complex is closely linked to corporate hip hop. So if you look at and you're a scholar of hip hop, if you think about the early days of hip hop, like when we were coming up in hip hop, there was a diversity that existed in hip hop. So you have everything from like the Jungle Brothers and, Tribe Called Quest to Public Enemy to NWA
all
to
at the same time.
DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. And then you had in the South, you had Bounce in New Orleans, you had Luke, you had A-Ball and MJG, like Outkast. Yeah, all these folks. But it was like diversity. At some point, and I located with the Chronic album, I think that, hip-hop became extremely corporate. This idea of like white tees and like, either khakis, white tees and khakis, or white tees and like sagging pants became synonymous with like hip hop across the board. All hip hop began to sound the same. All of the content was the same. All of the sound was the same. And there are like white men sitting at a desk somewhere who was actually capitalizing off of these images being perpetuated in terms of videos, music videos on MTV and BET. Because, even white interests like ads control what's played on BET on our black stations and our radio stations. And it was like very much so linked to the prison industrial complex. So my idea is that these young men are not like the lumpen proletariat. They're like protesting or whatever, like for this cause or this concept, but like they're buying into an idea of black masculinity that's basically being sold to them, right?
Wait. And I'm gonna push back against that because I don't disagree with that, but I think it's much more complicated than that, right? Because there are, of course, powers that are, manipulating the image, and we've been at the effect of that the entire time we've been in this country. That there's a campaign of visual images that dictate to people who they are, and
Birth of a Nation.
Right, we feed into that, and
shows.
But at the same time, there is, a lot to be said about the ways in which our youth take those same images and subvert them, even still, right? So I had my mind blown by a young brother, a D-boy, during the era where everybody was wearing the giant T-shirts and the big, sagging jeans and stuff like that. Everybody had on the same thing on the block. And this young man told me that was essentially a uniform, right? So when one time rolls through the block and they're like, oh, yeah, we saw them trapping or whatever they were doing, he was wearing a white shirt and jeans. Everybody's wearing a white shirt and jeans. You know what I'm saying? And so it becomes a kind of a camouflage, right? And so there's all these ways. And this is why, and so you guys don't know this, we've had this debate because another one of our sisters is here, Regina Bradley. I see you sitting over there. I think I saw Scott here as well. This is our crew. We have a crew, Trapidemia, where we talk about these concepts of trap as a kind of a technology. that's being employed through communities of marginalized and oppressed people. But you know, the ways in which that our society kind of dictates certain ideas to our culture, to our young people, but they take those ideas and they manipulate them and they subvert them and they turn them into something all their own. My whole point in all of this about sagging is that it's imperative on us as now adults, grown-ass people, you know, who see this kind of stuff happening, to engage rather than disengage. You know, because when we engage, then we can put these young people on to, you know what this is a kind of oppositional fashion. And if you are a little bit more deliberate in what you're doing, you can execute X, Y, and Z, as opposed to shutting them off or building up these walls. And then we continue these cycles where they do get manipulated by the system.
Definitely. I agree with you on that. And I mean, I think that's why I do work with young people. I always have worked with young people. And so while I'll definitely talk smack about them, I don't run from them. You know, I mean, even in terms of my community, like I live in Germantown, East Germantown, Philadelphia, which is an extremely black community. I think it's actually, and my daddy complains about this as well. Y'all can see my daddy's a huge influence in my life, but you know, he was like, yeah, you be wanting to be so Afrocentric and around your people all the time. Like, bro, chill out, I got this, you know. But when I looked up the stats on that, I think it's like one of the most violent area codes, like some of the most violent crimes happen in like East Germantown. But I don't tend to run from my people, you know what I mean? So it's like these are the young men that I'm engaged with every day when I go to the store, unless when I don't feel like being bothered with their asses. And then I go to Whole Foods so I can have some peace of mind when I'm shopping, because I do that too. Sometimes I don't like being around your people now, okay? Don't always feel like being around your people. So sometimes I need to take an escape from that, right? But on a day-to-day, like I'm constantly engaging with our community. And so I think it is important to have those conversations. Like even, you know, don't get it twisted. I've even written about this. This, you know, dress, you know, your African print Alegba-ish shirt, anybody's suit is not bulletproof. It's not gonna stop, like just because you dappered up, suited up, that is not gonna stop the police from pulling you over. It's not gonna stop them from harassing you, shooting you, you know, killing you, your mama, your sister, your brother, your child, your special needs nephew. So I'm not disillusioned by that. Like this is a type of armor. I think it's a armor in a sense that people who do dress up, it's a level of agency. I do look at it as ritual as well. And even for some other bodies, like queer bodies, you know, dressing up also allows them to maneuver through particular type of communities in particular types of ways, you know. So I am not, I'm not that invested in like being anti-sagging that I do not recognize how it can function, or that invested in dressing in a particular type of way, to also acknowledge how that can be problematic and how it could also not necessarily save us. I just want us to be able to have agency as a people and to express ourselves in the multitude of ways. Anytime we're all doing the exact same thing, that's a problem to me. I mean, just even like how we're talking right now, like in a lot of circles, this is not how academics talk, right? Scholars,
they're afraid to disagree with each other.
Yeah, they're afraid to disagree. That's one thing. You know, that everybody agrees. People have to also put on like white accents and white voices. I mean, there are so many places that my tongue, like my native tongue, has maybe barred me from, but then also has created, like I've been able to go to anywhere though around the black world and fit in because of the way like I'm my presentation, that affects, right? And that's something I think that we also like lose as a people in trying to be accepted so many times. But so that is also resistance. Like the fact that I have this very New Orleans accent is also resistance. So my thing is just like allow us to just create nuance and create a space for nuance. And we need to challenge these young brothers too.
Right on. Y'all can clap for that too.
So we all come back to black, unity, umoja.
Yeah, all that. Unity, all that. So, yeah, I don't know. Okay, your turn.
Oh, yeah. Good. Thought it was. I think this is a great time to transition into. Wait, how much time we have? Because we could totally just. What's some time now? Okay, good. And that includes questions. Oh, okay. See,
oh man, what have we been doing?
Yeah, I'm talking from the audience. Oh, okay, good. Rap black for gonna try to influence me to drink, and then gonna talk about something we got.
Drink.
Yeah.
Drink.
Anyway,
Drink.
so just one more swig. All right. And I'm sorry. This for the ancestors.
Yeah,
okay.
Ashe.
Sorry. Mafetafun Egun. All right. So that's great point. Do or die. You've increasingly you've always centered yourself and used your own image in your work, and I think that was central to this. Also, these conversations about the black body, how it's perceived as a young black man getting older, black man.
And you can see it too. My belly keeps expanding in these paintings.
Listen, Linda. Why was it why was it important for you to even use your own image and centralize that in your work?
That's a great question because it's something that I continue to unpack. It wasn't deliberate in the sense of I was trying to make a statement about it when I first started doing it in that way. So actually, it all really sort of emerged out of the whole Fahamu Peku's the shit thing, which really began as a joke. I was trying to figure out how to get my work into galleries and stuff like that. I was sending my packages. Nobody was calling me back. I figured maybe they couldn't pronounce my name, so I'm going to do something to make sure that they remember my name, And as I began to, explore that, and take on the different personas and ways that hip-hop, that black men were marketed in hip-hop, I was playing the part, and it just sort of evolved, more than a deliberate intention, it was an evolution. And so the question really kind of became, there are all of these statements about who I'm supposed to be as a black man that are being dictated to me by media, by society, and I didn't really fit into those boxes. And so for me, it was a kind of tongue-in-cheek, subversive way to play with what people thought I should be, and how that impacted who I thought I was supposed to be as well. And so for me, it was about kind of undoing expectations, oftentimes I would hear when I would travel for my shows and stuff like that, people would be like, oh, I thought you were going to be bigger. Or I thought you were taller. Or, oh, man, you're really quiet. Or you're actually smart. I didn't, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff like that, because people had these preconceived ideas about this character that I was painting. Even though it was my body, they couldn't, dissociate between their ideas about what a black man was supposed to be and what a black man actually was who was standing in front of them.
Right. And so your work, you started out with these, creating these covers of yourselves, many of which you have been on the cover. You've created that. That's real. I think visualization and the magic and technology of creating the type of life and existence that you want for yourself in reality. And then you move to this more Gravity series and the Sagging series. And then you got into grad school at Emory University because you wanted to not just be an artist but a scholar, and put those 3 letters behind your name. Yes. Become Dr. Peku. Can y'all give him a round of applause? Because this isn't just a black man who could paint his ass off and talk shit, but I mean he got some degrees to back it up.
And he can drink you under the table.
So-called. Okay, bring some rum, and then we're going to see what's going to happen. But anyway, so for your dissertation, which was something that I don't know that has ever been done before, where someone's created an exhibition has that? Do you know?
Not that I know of, yeah.
Okay, so you out
first
there
ever visual dissertation.
Can y'all give him another round of applause for that? Muhammad Ali has this quote, "It's not bragging if you can back it up."
Hey.
Ashe. So you entered this space where African spirituality became an important theme in your work. And I know that your own personal journey in the religion has had some influence on that. But even in how many people have gone to Do or Die? It just opened at Emory. All right, great. So how many people are planning to go to see Do or Die? All right, yes. So I've seen the images online, but going in, I was just really, really blown away by the scale, right? And there's a direct link between, what we're talking about in terms of disenfranchised black youth and, their debts, but then also the debts of other great black leaders, even in your Egungun pieces, You know, you've named like Medgar Evers and Patrice Lumumba, you know, all of these different ancestors who were also murdered by the state. And it's like very, you know, and ritual, right? So I'm interested in, because I feel like you have consistently talked about black masculinity, and this is like just a big broad question, probably because of the whiskey, but you consistently talked about masculinity, and I feel like in this show you also connect, like you're dealing with death. That's one thing, that theme of death. You're dealing with resistance. You're also dealing with masculinity, but also femininity. And so I'm just interested in how this like body of work really came to be, and like the intersection of all of those themes, like in this one particular show.
That is a big ass question. So let me see where to start. So in a lot of ways, I feel like this particular body of work and where I am in terms of my practice in this very moment is like a full circle return. I was talking to my Uncle Kibo last night. Is Kibo here? I was talking to Uncle Kibo last night, and he was talking about this piece that he has in his collection that I did back in like 2001 when I was doing the series. It was called the Muse series, and it was the series of drawings, like charcoal drawings that I was making of these figures that were really just coming out of my imagination. And for me, even though it was coming from my imagination, it was a very spiritual exercise. You know, like back in those days, I used to work at Wolf Camera on 14th Street, and I would have to walk from Art Center train station to Wolf Camera, and sometimes I hated that job. And I would be walking down the street, and I would see like a feather, you know, on the ground, and I would pick it up, and I'd be like, oh, this is like a message from my angels telling me that they're watching out for me, you know. And I would take those feathers and put it in my sketchbook, and then I would ultimately work the feathers into these paintings and drawings that I was making. You know, one day I was in my office, you know, because I also did graphic design on the side, and a friend came in. He was dressed in all white, and I asked him, like, what you dressed like that for? You know, he's like, I just got back from Nigeria. I'm a Babalawo, and I'm like, a what? You know? And he starts explaining it to me. I ended up going to an Ilé with another friend of mine, and when I walked into the Ilé on that Sunday, it was an ancestor veneration service that they were doing. It was the first time that I ever stepped across the threshold of a so-called religious space and felt instantly at home, right? And as they were venerating the ancestors, they were describing what that looked like, you know, the symbolism, the significance and the meaning, you know, all these different aspects of it. And I realized that everything that they were saying was stuff that I was doing in my artwork. I just didn't have a language for it, right? And so that's how, you know, Ifa first found me, you know? And, you know, as I said, when I started to respond to your big ass question, you know, this body of work with Do or Die is really a kind of return, you know, to those questions. You know, what does it mean to have, you know, spiritual warriors, you know, looking out for you, protecting you, speaking to you, working through you. And so when I was invited to do an exhibition at the Halsey Institute at the College of Charleston, the invitation came from Mark Sloan, who's the director. We had spoken maybe a couple years before, and he told me, when the time is right, I would love to show your work. Fast forward to 2015, when Walter Scott was shot by the police officer from a routine traffic stop. I get a package in the mail one day. It's a copy of the Post-Courier, which is the newspaper in Charleston, with a sticky note on it that just said, "It's time." You know, and so that's really kind of where a lot of my ideas and my thinking about resistance and art as a form of resistance, and, you know, African spirituality and hip hop culture, and all these ideas began to coalesce to form this body of work. And it was really sort of again a journey for me to just ask a series of questions like, what kind of life could we live if we weren't afraid to die? You know, and, you know, my research around resistance have been resistance to the spectacle of Black death, which has kind of been like a cloud that's, you know, been over the heads of Black people since they first started bringing us over to this country, where they would threaten you with violence and death. If you don't get in line, if you don't pick this cotton, if you don't, stay in your place, we will kill you, we will destroy you. And I wanted to do something that would say, you can't destroy me, right? Because I think having a sense of yourself that goes beyond your physical frame changes the way you move in the world. Yeah.
Yes, Ashe. That reminds me of, I remember around the time of my wedding, Trump had just gotten elected, right? And I was depressed. I mean, I think we all were. But not only that, I think growing up in the South, we've always had a very visceral reaction to white people. And I think our generation got lost for a second after the civil rights movement and then the Black Power movement. Things were seemingly really good for black people. Like black folks were, buying homes and cars and getting these jobs in corporate America and being able to get into these white institutions. So there was an illusion of real progress being made. While people were still getting shot, people were still getting harassed and beat down by the police. We witnessed Rodney King live while it was happening. We just didn't have social media back then. Right. So black men have consistently been, either metaphorically and or physically like lynched by the system and by this state.
Black men and women.
Yeah, right. That's real. And so, I was very depressed, because I've always been afraid of white people. I mean, that's reality. When I'm in a large group of white people, especially when they've been drinking, I do not feel safe. I can go into any project, any slum around the world with a whole bunch of black folks, and I can hold my own. But when I'm around a whole bunch of white people, I do not feel safe because you have no idea what they're going to do. Like, you know what I mean? So unpredictable. So I'm traveling from Philly to come home, and we had to stop in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was listening to Tribe's latest CD, which was the last CD that...
After Fife died.
Yeah, right. And so, which was so it was so prophetic. That CD was so prophetic. And so I called my godfather, my Oba, and I was like telling him what I was going through. And he told me this pataki. A pataki is like a story in Yoruba land, like a proverb. And so he said it was like the story about these birds and the children of the cotton. And he said, who were cotton seeds. He said, when those birds tried to swallow the children of the cotton, those cotton seeds, they choked. And so we are the children of cotton, right? We're the children of cotton, we're the children of tobacco, we're the children of sugarcane, we're children of all these things. And like at the end of the day, if they try to swallow us, they'll choke. And so I think that your work speaks to it. I think my work speaks to it because we're consistently looking at what is life after death? Like what is life after this particular moment? What is life after oppression? What does freedom look like? And so if you could talk about what your idea of freedom looks like for us as a people, because I think sometimes we tend to get so bogged down by the oppression and the gravity of it all, like literally and figuratively, we can't even visualize what's next, right? We can't even visualize what our freedom looks like. And that's why I'm always saying that joy is resistance. Anytime you go and love another black human being, whether you're straight or you're queer, you're old or you're young, that's an act of resistance. When you walk down the street with your black family, that's an act of resistance. Whenever you get dressed up and put some pride into oiling your beard or twisting your hair or getting braids or like bamboo earrings, whatever, that's an act of resistance. Anytime you laugh, that's an act of resistance. What for you, like what does our freedom look like? Like what's possible for us as a people?
I'm gonna need another bottle of whiskey. How many of you have seen If Beale Street Could Talk? That, to me, I'm going to try my very best without getting emotional up here. I haven't had quite enough whiskey for y'all to get some tears out of me, but there's a moment in that film where Fonny recognized, like it's the scene where it's cutting back and forth between, it's surrounding him looking at a raw piece of wood that he's working with in his studio. and it cuts back to him sort of coming to grips with the situation that he's in, right? And there's this sort of metaphor at the level of affect that happens there, right? Where he recognizes that before him is this raw clay moment to make of whatever he will make it be, right? Just like with his wood, I can turn this into whatever is in there, right? This situation now that I'm confronted with, if I stop, take a deep breath, and look at this, I can manipulate this into something that ultimately benefits me, right? And I think that our expression as a people becomes that liberatory force. Like just like you said, when we adorn ourselves, when we love, when we take the risks to allow ourselves to take in where we are, who we are, then we can become whatever it is that we want to be. But while we're busy being distracted by all of these things that are telling us what we can't be and what we can't do, we will never become, right? And so it's about deciding. Just make a decision. Like, this is what I'm going to do. This is who I'm going to be. Everything else moves out of your way. That's what I feel.
Thank you.
What about you?
Oh,
You can't make me answer that and you not answer it.
Told you I shouldn't have let him peer pressure me. That's supposed to have my back. Have the black woman's back. I think for me, freedom, the closest thing to a utopia would be Wakanda, which is crazy because it's a fictional film, but I mean, I think about the technology that existed on the continent. Like, what would have happened if, the continent's advancement was not interrupted by slavery and colonization? And a lot of times I think colonization was even worse for people on the continent than slavery was for us for a lot of different reasons. But to be honest, I think freedom for me just is the ability of us just to be, period. Not have to worry about changing our voice to get a job, not worrying about what we're naming our young people. I mean, as it's 2019 and we still got folks naming people like, European names, right? I think it's the freedom to love whomever we want to love without, being violently murdered or killed or harassed. It looks like, little girls and little boys not being molested and assaulted. It looks like women be able to walk down the street and everything that God gave them naturally without them being attacked. I mean, freedom is just to be like whatever, to be loud, to be brash, to be quiet, to be funny, to be brilliant, to be, challenged. I really, that is what freedom looks like. And I know this is controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think one of the biggest issues for us has been like a spirituality that has taught us to turn the other cheek.
Ain't nothing controversial about that. That's facts.
One that has told us to be forgiving, right? And I remember asking my godmother one time about forgiveness and give me a proverb for that in Yoruba, at least in the Yoruba context, and she couldn't think of one. And so there is technology that is being used that has come from us, ancient technology, whether it's disguised as like Skull and Bones and all these other secret societies at white institutions, or it's Masons, or it's so many different things. There's technology that's being accessed and that's being used. And there's technology that we have access to that we're not using as a people. If you look at any historical rebellion of enslaved Africans, at the heart of that was a liberatory spirituality.
Ashe.
Beginning with the very first one in Haiti, where there was a ceremony being led by Boukman, a Jamaican who was in Haiti, who they exclaimed, they said, bon Dieu, good God, like give us the power to be victorious over the people that would enslave us. And that is the way that Haiti won its freedom. And to this day, Haiti is still being punished for that. So to me, at the heart of our liberation and the heart of our freedom is this technology and the spirituality that we all have access to. And it's not just Yoruba, it's Vodou, it's Zulu, it's Akan, it's Hoodoo, it's all of these different things that was created for us to heal ourselves
because it
and to
is
be well.
us. It is us. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not even, and this is one of the things to your point that we have to come to grips with, is that spirituality or our spiritual power is not something that is external from us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that anybody else can give us, or it's not something that anybody else needs to interpret for us. We have to interpret and activate for ourselves.
I say.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy to the point where that we do things where they're speaking in tongues. We're indulging like ecstasy in churches and don't even realize where that comes from. And I poured out that liquor, excuse me, Auburn Avenue Research Library and Center, for your carpet. But, it would be disrespectful for us to be up here and not recognize our ancestors. So when you go back to even those brothers sagging their pants on the corner, and when they're pouring out that liquor to their dead homies, that's a libation. Even in our dance forms, one of my elders, Mama Coco, who actually taught at Clark for a minute, there's like this 4-point like cosmogram, like in the Congo, like cosmology that's semicircular, and you'll find that in a ring shout in the Carolinas. You'll find that in our bus stop, or anytime we do line dances, when we hit those 4 points, we hit that point, we hit that point, we hit that point, we hit that point. So this like spirituality is in us. Even we don't recognize it, we're still expressing ourselves as African people. And so I think the closer that we get, we have the knowledge, whether it's the research, the books, the ability to travel and go and visit the continent. So because regardless, people will have you thinking that you're going to go over there and they're not going to greet you as your brother and your sister. That's not the case.
They love to see us coming.
And vice versa, right? Because it's not like about a hierarchy or like we have more than them or vice versa, but it's just like connecting with our brothers and sisters. But we have so much access as a people to connect with one another, and I think that it's time for us to start using those tools.
Ashe. I see Leatrice. She's standing over there like, she told us we had 30 minutes 10 minutes ago.
A whole bunch of time.
Look, that was 25 minutes ago. But thank you very much. And I feel like this is a great place to put a pin in this conversation. So please give them applause for this wonderful. Someone hit me up earlier, and they're just like, "Are they going to talk for 3 hours?" And I was like, they could, but no. But thank you so much. And the reason I'm stopping you, though, is because we did want to end at 3:30, but I absolutely wanted to give people an opportunity to ask you a few questions. So it's 3:17 right now, and we can take a few questions from the audience. So raise your hand if you have a question and come meet me over here, gentlemen, and person over here. So we probably have enough time for, you have a question? Oh, you do? Okay, so for these 3 questions, that's perfect. So let's go ahead and take these 3 questions, and then.
You see that? You see how his shoe work?
Yo. So, go right ahead.
Hello, how you doing? My name is Savanzel. I lived in Ghana for 6 months. A couple of years ago, I went there, and my question, how do we transfer the different 2 cultures of growing up in America, black, and then you go to Africa, and it's like a disconnect because of the images of what is being taught about black men in this country. So if you could speak about masculinity, that transfer of culture.
I think one of the most immediate ways that we can respond to that is by going.
Okay.
The challenge that we often have is that we let somebody else tell us what's happening someplace else, rather than going to see for ourselves. One of the biggest culture shocks I ever had in my life was when I traveled to South Africa for the first time. It was nothing like I thought it was going to look like. The people weren't anything like I thought they were going to be like. And in fact, it was crazy because people couldn't even tell where I was from. I had people running up, "Where are you from? Are you from Zimbabwe? Are you from Kenya? Are you from this?" I'm like, "Nah, I'm from the United States." They were like, "Well, I couldn't tell. Your hair is like, you look like your hair is East African, and your shoes are North African, and your voice is, you know what I mean?" So it's like going, like traveling, and I think this is one of the biggest issues that we have as Americans is that we get so fixed, in thinking that, I represent Zone 6.
Yeah.
It's so much more to the world than Zone 6, and we have to get out of that and actually go. Yeah.
It was a negative experience for me in terms after I was there for a minute. It's like I was like, I'd rather go to New York and go to LA and travel here in the US than to go back to Africa, because I had such a, I had an adverse experience with the Europeans and the Asians. I had a guy that was from Britain. He owned a lot of property there. He said his father, his mother, they was born here, and he was born in Africa, and I wasn't. He's like, where's your grandfather? You don't have no grandfather here. You say you, because I got off the plane kissing the ground. I'm in Africa. Oh, I was so happy. And when I got in the Trotro, I was charged more. I was experiencing things that, oh, you a black American, you got money, you need to pay more. And I was like, but I knew, because I had research, so I knew how much money I need to pay for things. And so I had Africans defending this guy because they worked for him. And I was like, dang, I had a lot of bad experiences over there. So I was like, well, when I spend my money now, I'm traveling the U.S. I ain't even going back to Africa. I had that kind of experience.
But can I challenge you on this? You know how big Africa is?
Yeah.
You know that the United States of America could fit into Africa 3 times?
Right, I do. I know that.
You understand that?
Yeah.
So, let me tell you about my experience recently when I was in Nigeria. Because first of all, when you do travel, whether you're in Europe or Africa, people going to see you as an American first.
Right.
And then black. You know what I mean? In America, Americans, white, black, Asian, that means money.
Right.
What they don't understand, because they see on TV, they see Love and Hip Hop, them shows that y'all be supporting, but that might be my respectability coming out. And Real Housewives and stuff. So they watching all that, and they thinking that we all got money, right? So I was going to Nigeria, and I saw we were standing in line. I'm just getting off the plane. I'm tired, whatever. The airport is crazy in Lagos, bananas, right? So there's a white boy who is like, they got some black chick that's leading him through the line, and he's cutting us. And they stopped right in front of us. I was like, you do see this line, right? And he's kind of like, well, what you want me to do? I was like, I want your behind to get from in front of me. And so he was like, I was like, look, I did not come all the way to the continent for your ass to be cutting me, all right, at the end of the day. So you could keep it moving and go all the way to the front of the line and so I don't see you, or you could go back behind me, but you're not about to stand right in front of me and stop. That's not going to happen. But the whole point is that was a tangent. You can't let no white man tell you where you from and who you are. In Africa, Atlanta, the SWATs, wherever. Right. And you also can't take that one experience and then say, I'm not going back to Africa, I'm going to New York. Like, the continent's huge. It's huge.
And I'm sure there's other places in Ghana where you would have had a completely different experience.
Yeah, because I had an amazing time. I almost got married in Ghana. You know what I'm saying? Almost. Almost. But I married me a Nigerian. I didn't tell y'all. If I want to ask me how I started Dandelion, I'm going to be real honest. I'm going to keep it short. But really, I was like, how do I attract a well-dressed black man? Oh, have an exhibition about well-dressed black men. So, because I'm talking about visualization. Y'all talking about a vision board. That's a vision board for that ass, right? So I was like, I kept going to all these art receptions and stuff. Couldn't find no husband. So finally, one day, in my DMs, slid this Nigerian brother who went to Howard University with me at the same time, was 2 spots away from me in a yearbook. In fact, that Dominican dude I told you about, it was my husband, Benny, and then me. That's how crazy this world is. Slid in my DMs, all because of the Dandelion Project. Won't he do it? Ashe! Ashe! Hum shaka raka.
That was actually a perfect segue for my question.
Well, how to get your husband, girl? Do it in exhibition.
A whole nother question. Right, I got you. My name's Lorelia Freeman, and I'm teaching Spanish at an all-boys black charter school. And the whole conversation about clothing as protest. So yesterday in my homeroom, we're fighting about when we wear which uniform. And I'm always the heavy on this one, right? So the disciplinarian starts calling parents about kids who are out of uniform, and it starts in my homeroom. So this whole conversation about protest through clothing, I think about this in the school context, particularly in the charter school context, because we've got knowledge equated with uniform. Can we speak to that for a minute? What that means about, we talk about schools as being the feeder to prisons, and wrapped up in that is this whole notion of what we have on.
You want to do it?
I feel like that
go
question
first.
we'd be here for the rest of the day.
Right.
But no, I mean, I think it's so multi-layered, the ways in which this society tries to. Let me say it like this. The question of uniforms, the questions of uniformity, all of this is about systems of control for somebody else's convenience, right? So rather than have to deal with students who are expressive in a variety of different ways, we need you to do X, Y, and Z in this order, no deviation, everybody in a straight line. I'm going to detour a little bit because I just finished watching Killer Mike's show, Trigger Warning.
Yeah.
Have you seen it? It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's hilarious, but it's also brilliant. And there's this, in the very last episode, he has this whole concept of a new Africa. Okay, sorry. But in it, there's these questions about conformity, right? And how societies are really sort of oriented around getting its citizens, its peoples to conform to specific ideas. And when someone breaks from that conformity, how it creates a distraction. And the question then becomes, do we want to create a place that dictates conformity, or do we want to embrace individuality, right? And I think that is ultimately the question that we need to think about, not just in terms of uniforms, but even in the way we think about education. Because every child, every person learns differently, and when we begin to put value on individual difference as opposed to put value on, conformity, I think it changes the narrative for people across the board in all walks of life.
Right. But I have something different to say. As a person who actually wore uniforms like for 12 years, particularly in the public space, or I was in the private schools, but in public school space, a lot of times it's about economics as well. Kids get teased when they don't have like Gucci belts and, $1,000 tennis shoes and sneakers. And so I think, socioeconomics is also at play here. You know what I mean? I think that uniforms is a way like to kind of create like equity amongst like families. Because it's like there are kids that are going to schools that do not have food in the morning. They're going to the corner stores. They're eating like wrap snacks and potato chips, all this high fructose corn syrup, drinking Coca-Cola, and that's their meal. And so then people are like, oh, they got their ADHD. They don't know how to act. They're getting all this discipline. But it's like, if you haven't had like a well-nourished meal and breakfast, then how you expect me to act? And I'm also eating all this sugar for survival. So I think socioeconomics is at play, and that's also another like issue in addition to like the conformity piece.
But I think to the point I'm making is I'm not arguing that uniforms are bad, but this idea of making everybody do everything one way, and the systems of value that we apply to things.
No, agreed.
Right? You know what I'm saying? So even in this idea of like, children wearing, $100 sneakers and stuff to school, it's because we have imposed on them that they are more valuable because of what they have on.
Yeah.
Not because of who they are.
Right.
And so it's like shifting, the perspective of what is valuable. You as a person are valuable,
Right.
not what you wear.
Right.
It doesn't matter what you wear. What do you bring to the table?
Right.
Yeah.
Ashe.
So happy to be here. Hadn't planned to come, but after last night, I knew I had to be here. I was born in Lolly Kemp. I graduated from Howard University. But I wanted to share, my dad works concerts. He sells pennants and things like that. And he talks about the fact that at concerts, white women come to concerts and they either have their hair parted down the center, on the right, or on the side. Black women come to concerts and you have hair every kind of different way. And it talks about what you're saying as improvisation and individuality and our hair. I know you all are talking about fashion, but what is it about our hair that seems to be so off-putting to the general populace. I'm beginning to think they know something about our hair that we must have forgotten. And, you know, how does that fit in with, you know, all of this rearticulating not only black masculinity, but blackness as a whole?
Okay, real quick. So I'm gonna tell you how important hair is. Yesterday, I was like, "Ooh, I need to get my hair done because it looked a mess," and I googled this black hair salon, natural hair salon. I'm not gonna say who they were. I went. They said they would take me last minute. I went in. The girl did my hair. I was like, "Girl, they don't look like my hair got done." She redid it. I was like, and I drove off, and I FaceTime my friend. She was like, "Girl, you did not pay $85 for that hairstyle." Went back. And then the owner was like, "Oh, you want her to do 3 hairstyles?" And I do. I got this hat on, though, because I wasn't still not pleased, and I was going to badmouth them. But that's how important black hair is. In hoodoo, I just wanted to get, that's important. Hair is important. In hoodoo, like in anywhere around the world, hoodoo, juju, whatever, it is well known a fact that your hair is essential to who you are as a person, your soul. You can take a strand of hair, and they're like, always don't let nobody get your hair. You know what I mean? Y'all have heard that, like, old, yeah, y'all from the South. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Don't let nobody get your hair, right? In that single strand of hair is your DNA. So you think about your DNA. That's unlocking not only your past, but your future as well. They have been using the DNA of black people, of black women, Henrietta Lacks, to understand, like, just science, right? Like, the whole world. And so that might be another tangent. But the whole point is our hair is dominant. Like, all of our genes are dominant. European genes are recessive. Their blue eyes, blonde hair, like features are recessive. That's why around the world, like even in the U.S., the population is increasingly becoming more people of color. Like they're saying that minority is being a more majority. I always tell people we should stop using the language of minority because we're actually the world's majority. And that also goes for our hair and our hair texture. But I mean, that's just my thing. I mean, it's nothing real scientific to that beyond what I already said, but I'm just like, we just fly, that's all.
Well, I'm just going to add to that too. I mean, I think that there are when you go back and you begin to really investigate African culture in terms of beautification and adornment, you know, everything that is done in terms of, and Chantrell talked about this earlier, like we didn't just create art to put up on a wall. Like everything has ritualistic, spiritual connection and value to it. And even the way we self-present, even the way we do our hair, there's rituals around hair. There's rituals around certain styles. In fact, one of a body of work that I'm working on right now for a show later this year is called Of Crowns and Kings, that examines the rituals around black men in their hair and the ways in which black men style their hair and the spaces, you know, that are sacred to black men in their hair. And because, again, it is extremely important. As you guys see, I've been walking around with this Gumby haircut since like 2008 because this is me. This is who I am. You know what I mean? And I've had many other styles, from locks to afros to even a bald head at one point. Don't ask me any questions about that. But, you know, it is really a part of personal self-expression, and that speaks to one's ori, like your own personal destiny is dictated by the way you present yourself.
I say.
Good evening, everyone. Rudolph Delancey Daniels. Taught at HBCU for about 4 years, rap course and a Black Conscious course, Hampton University. And want to ask this particular question. I'm seeing it somewhat in film. You know, Wakanda, Birth of a Nation, there's been a change from NWA type movies, shoot 'em up type thing, people get shot, to more of a conscious type thing, where we walk out and have a great feeling about ourselves and a little bit more knowledgeable. So in our class, you know, we talk about Nat Turner. I tell everybody, when I was in college, we used to have Nat Turner Day. You know, we had Martin Luther King Day, but we had Nat Turner Day too. But what I'm trying to get to in my question, I want to see what you all are seeing. One thing I make my students do is read today's rap. And I make them contrast it with rap that I came up with. I graduated in the early 90s. I'm a PE head. You know, the song that changed me was I Got a Letter from the Government.
The
I
other
opened
day,
it.
I opened and read it. They said they
It was
wanted
suckers.
suckers.
Yeah.
They wanted me for they on me
We
or
can go, yeah.
whatever. Picturing me giving a damn. I said
No.
never. Here's, okay.
Yeah. So, so I still have that in my car, and songs like that made us study.
Mm-hmm.
We just couldn't go to the club. We had to think about what happened to our forefathers. I had to think about what happened to my grandfather, how he had to drop out in 6th grade, and all the things that happened. Songs like that by Boogie Down Productions and the rest made us study, made us be a little bit more conscious, made us love each other, made us love black. We thought differently about black. But songs today, as I make my students read, and I make them get up and read, and I say read the songs, and some of them are ashamed. Because, you know, we get all the unfavorable adjectives that make us almost hate black.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell them it's psychological, and what they're doing to you from a psychological standpoint and how you view yourself. So what I'm going to ask you is, what are you seeing? Because I see it happening in film, and we all wanted that change, but are you seeing anything in music to start to make the change? Because within music, you know, your music comes from your culture.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Let me get to the question.
Professor.
Anyway, I'm seeing it in film. What are you seeing in music to make the change? Because once you see that change, you'll start to see change within black men and black women and how we view ourselves. So are you seeing any change?
I'm gonna be real quick. I'll say that I don't think it's like a lot of when I talk to young men, they'll tell me like they're just expressing their reality, and that's what a lot of that music is doing. Like they're really talking about some of them are perpetrating. Like who was it? The dude that they said he grew up. His mama was a Delta. He grew up in Maryland or something like that. Gucci Mane or somebody from. Okay, well, maybe something not Gucci Mane, but maybe one of the dudes from I don't know Migos or something. Yeah, Migos, right? They say he grew up, his mom was a Delta, and so he grew up middle class, right? So sometimes, like, folks are perpetrating, but I think in some cases they're really just speaking to the reality, which is a real thing. I don't think we always have to feel good. I do want to say that as much as I think joy is resistance, a part of expressing our humanity is also expressing ratchetness. You know, it's like the whole gamut, you know, of everything, that the whole spectrum of black reality. Because that is like we should be able to live in a world where there's space for all of that. But because of white supremacy, the only thing that we can really push all the time is excellence without recognizing that other aspect. But I will say that even when I look back, but during that time period, there was also like Luke and Too Short. And when I listen to some of those lyrics, I'm like, damn, and I was singing it myself. You know, I was like rapping those lyrics myself, and it's extremely harmful and very violent. One of my professors at Temple, because I got my graduate degree there in Africana Studies, she did a study between rap lyrics and country music, and said like in country music she found themes of like love and talking about pride and family. I'll say in music, I've seen similar themes in like Afro beats, like contemporary Afro beats. If you listen to Afro beats, which is becoming a lot more popular, I think in mainstream music, you know, like dudes are talking about like, oh, my woman, you know, my darling, my baby, you know, or like my number one or whatever, but they're really talking about like their family, talking about love. I mean, they still have some like shake your booty, you know, that type of stuff, but I think that there are a lot more, there's a variety of themes that just really also speak to that, like, everyday type of reality and not just like the base, you know, of our experiences as a people.
I'm going to agree and ride with you on that, but I'm also caution us to, again, not dismiss our youth out of hand. You know, regardless of the fact that, you know, some of the material that's, you know, some of the language that's being used may not necessarily be the most favorable language. The idea that these young people are writing and trying to express themselves is something for us to engage with, right? And I think oftentimes when we fail to do that, we miss the spaces where they are saying some stuff that's actually pretty revolutionary and pretty dope. You know what I'm saying? Like my homie Ayo one time broke down, you know, the song where the guy's like, let's F up some commas. You know what I'm saying? 5,000 to 100,000. You know what I'm saying? Like she gave me a different perspective of thinking about what he was talking about with that song. About, you know, rather than being like lamenting, oh, I'm poor, poor, poor. He's like, I'm getting money. Like, let's get money. You know what I'm saying? It's a different way to think about it, and we have to begin to tune our ears to hear things differently. Like if we are looking for problems, we're gonna find problems. right? But if we're looking for something else, we can find something else. And you know, there are artists who they're like, you know, the ones that if you're just listening to the radio, you're gonna hear a bunch of BS, right? But if you actually do the research, you can find the artists that are talking about things that are really, and the young people are listening to that. They don't listen to the radio. You know what I'm saying? Like they're listening to, they're downloading stuff. They got artists on SoundCloud and things that they're listening to that are saying some pretty dope stuff, that are doing some really innovative things musically, right? But if you stuck on V103 or one of these other stations, like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's for the other people. That ain't for us. You know what I'm saying? But we have to do the work. And sometimes you got to do work. And, you know, it's like convenience oftentimes is a great distraction for everybody. You know, if you're not willing to go down the rabbit hole, just fall back. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're going to just be like, oh, you know, these young people today, you know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, yeah, there's some things that we could work on, and maybe we can engage with them. You know what I'm saying? Like, I work with young people, too, and I had this student recently. We were working on a project, and he wanted to do something about hood rich, you know, and all of his images were like money and drugs and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, you know, in the cars, and I'm like, I get it. I see that that's hood rich. But what else could hood rich be? You know? And he sat there scratching his head like, man, you messing with me, Mr. Faham. You making me think. I was like, exactly. That's what we're supposed to do. You know what I'm saying? And I think oftentimes these people are disconnected from us because we don't challenge them in that way. We got to push back.
So we're going to take one more question, and then our board chair would like to just address the audience, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for the afternoon. So you won't hear from me again. So I'd just like to say thank you all for being here this afternoon. Everybody that's down here, everybody that's up there. Plus, this can be found online. So Auburn Avenue always records these conversations, and they'll probably post it over the next couple of days. So please share it with people. And I'm going to let her ask her question, and then we're going to keep it moving. So thank you all very much.
Ungawa.
Hello. Thanks for the great conversation. My question is, how do you use art to combat kind of the negative things that we've gotten on the journey? Like, for example, white supremacy that's embedded, I guess, internalized white supremacy, homophobia, those type of isms and phobias. So I was wondering if you all could kind of speak to that and speak to if going to the continent helped with that or how help grapple with that.
I would say for me, you know, I've always been very much engaged with like visual culture and the way visual culture shaped my perspective. You know, when I was 18 years old, I always tell this story. When I saw Menace to Society when I was 18 years old, that movie messed me up for a long time, you know, and it wasn't like I hadn't seen anything like that before, but something about that movie got inside me, and it really, you know, it really did a number on me. And for many years after seeing that movie, I measured my success in life by ticking off the tragedies that I avoided, because I just knew I was gonna die. You know, I knew I was gonna get killed in a drive-by. I ain't never been in no gang. I ain't never even been in a fight. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, why would that, you know, but it was so much of like the narrative, the visual narrative around my existence as a black man was, you know, death, destruction, drugs, you know, ineptitude, all of these different things, and it wasn't me, you know. And so I began to use my own artwork as a way to like deconstruct that, you know. And I think our way of fighting back against, you know, these images, these types of images, is to have more of our stories out there. Is to show, you know, have more black visual artists doing work and telling their stories, more black filmmakers, more black musicians, but again, not allowing, you know, white society or the dominant culture to dictate to us what is the most appropriate or the most accurate depiction of who we are. We have to make that decision. Yes. Yeah, we have to say that this is us, this is who we are, and we have to do it in a way that represents the complexity of us, because we're not one thing. We're not a monolith. You know what I'm saying? Like Everybody didn't grow up I grew up in the projects, but my project experience wasn't the same as somebody else who grew up in the projects in New York. You know what I'm saying? It's like, all of these different stories are important, and when we get to see all of them, we get to kind of like create our own reality around and outside of those experiences.
I think visual culture, I mean, everything Fahamo just said, visual culture also had the same impact on me. The movie that was the most influential on me, you already know the answer to that.
No. I know what it is.
She's your queen
I didn't want to say it.
to be a vision of perfection.
She is very happy to be
Of
here.
affection to quench your royal fires. Completely free from infection, to be used at your discretion, and always in your direction. Your queen to be. Listen, y'all. I remember when Coming to America came out, I was 11. My mama took me to go see it. Maybe my little brother, my cousin. I was blown away by that movie. Just the idea that blackness was just that rich and opulent. Like, I was like, that's what I want to do. So I threw the blackest wedding ever. Fahama was there.
Hey,
Y'all
and
can
it
look it
really
up.
was.
Joloff and Jambalaya on the internet. Still going viral. No, but that movie definitely had an impact on me. Several months later, or maybe like the next spring later, Ellie was traveling around the country, and so they came to New Orleans to the Sanger Theater, and my mom was like, oh, we're gonna go see Elvin Ailey, and I was like, what's that? And she was trying to explain it was like this black dance theater, and so I was like, are they gonna be doing dances like Coming to America? And that for me was like that visual representation of African dance, because I hadn't been introduced to that as a child. That just had such an impact on me in terms of like what was possible even for my life and for like black people as a whole. And so visual culture is so very important. Sometimes I always ask, I remember when I first started doing like movement work with Malcolm X grassroots movement, and that was like way before Black Lives Matter even existed, and like MXGM was doing all these like grassroots concerts to raise money for political prisoners, like Asada, and it was like Talib Kweli and Mos Def and like all these conscious rappers. And I used to be like, what's my role in this movement though? Because me being on the front lines, that's not my thing. I can't go out there with a bullhorn and like bring 500, 1,000 people out to like a police station. And like, whatever you do, if you're a doctor, you can contribute to our advancement as a people. Like you do work like to advance us, our health, like black women who die, in hospitals because people don't listen to us. When we say we know what's going on with our bodies, do that work or learn holistic healing as a physician. If you're a teacher, you're teaching the minds of young black people, right? Or if you're a writer, then you write those stories that have yet to be told. Anything that you do, you can play your position in advancing who we are as a people. You don't have to be on the front lines. The front lines could look different from all of us. And for us as artists, like Du Bois in 1926 in his criteria for Negro art, he said, I don't give a damn about art that's not used for propaganda. Hey. So that's the platform that I'm on. That's the platform for Hamo on. That's what you need to be on all day, every day, if we ever gonna get free. And I think then that's the time. We done?
Well, you gotta
little black power fist in the air. Look at my boy Mario, H2 in the house for real. Thank y'all so much. Y'all said, look at Corey. Corey and I used to have rap battles against each other since we was like 12. I still know that rap.
So if we could ask you just to hold for 1 second. First of all, if we can give another round of applause to Chantrell and Fahamo. This is a great. And I just wanted to do two things really, really quickly. One, if we can ask Donna and Audrey to come forward, please. Donna and Audrey, quickly. One of the things that we on the board don't get to do a lot of, people see, I say all the time to Leatrice, that people see that for 31 years now that the Hammond's House doors have been open, people see great exhibitions happening, but what they don't see, they think oftentimes that we just have this budget and this staff like the High. And just on behalf of our board of directors, some of who are represented here, I wanted to, one, let you see this is the Hammond's House staff. a staff that, just so that you'll know, that does all of this and more. And because of budgetary situations, and that's real, I want us to be real about what Leatrice said, works part-time. So this is not a Monday through Friday, open on weekends institution. These amazing women. So let me just say they're not slaving because they paid. My boss helped me understand that when I told him slavery was ended. But seriously, that they are working part-time, but do the work of overtime. And so I just wanted to, one, take a moment to publicly, because oftentimes when you are hearing from me, I know that it's sometimes putting down the whip on different things, but to publicly just say, we appreciate you all. We appreciate your commitment. And not just your commitment to the Hammonds House, but your individual commitment to this community, not just the community of Atlanta, but to the community of ensuring that Black art, and particularly the Black visual arts, are alive and continuing to impact this region and this nation. So thank you. And then lastly, I want to thank all of you all. But the way that you can thank this staff and you can thank these amazing artists is to ensure that institutions like the Hammonds House can continue to thrive and continue to, most importantly, stay open. Because if we rely on mainstream organizations to tell our stories and to present our art, one is, oftentimes, as has been alluded to, the artists are not allowed, and here where I say allowed, to be all of who they are in many cases, because they are told how to present their art, and then the artists then have to make that decision if, where that balance is. But institutions like the Hammonds House allow transparency and freedom to be all of who artists from the African diaspora should be and could be, and the impact that they need to make not only on the Black community, but on civilization. So I invite you again to join us in this journey by becoming Hammonds House members and continuing to not only support this institution, but to support the phenomenal arts across this nation. So thank you and enjoy.